the Grand Bellview Hotel, nestled in the heart of Manhattan, stood as a beacon of opulence. Its chandeliered lobby gleamed like a jewel, the polished marble floors reflecting the glow of 1,000 shimmering lights. Guests draped in designer suits and elegant evening gowns wandered through the space, their laughter and conversation filling the air with a harmonious murmur. The staff, stationed like sentinels, moved quietly between the crowds, each one perfectly in tune with the rhythm of the night. Kevin stood at the grand entrance, embodying quiet confidence. At 6 feet tall, he had a commanding presence that could not be overlooked. His movements were purposeful, his calm professionalism setting him apart from the bustle around him. He greeted each guest with the same respectful smile, a gesture that had become second nature. It was a job he had honed over the years, but tonight there was something different in the air. The crowd felt heavier, more electric, as if something was waiting to unfold. His sharp eyes scanned each arrival, making sure no detail went unnoticed. As a black man in a predominantly white, affluent space, Kevin had long been accustomed to subtle slights and microaggressions. Yet, his patience had been his armor, and it never failed him. But what few knew was that Kevin wasn't just a doorman. No, his role was far more intricate than anyone could imagine. The son of the hotel's CEO, his position was not born out of necessity but of choice, a deliberate step to understand the full spectrum of the family business. To truly connect with the people who walked through those grand doors, both the guests and the employees. Outside, the drizzle began to fall, soft and steady. Kevin stepped forward, his hand raised with an umbrella for a couple arriving in a sleek black town car. "Welcome to the Grand Bellevue," he said, his baritone voice smooth, inviting. He guided the woman carefully under the umbrella, leading her to the dry safety of the lobby. A simple gesture, but one that exemplified the professionalism that defined him. It was all routine for Kevin, until the man appeared. Just as he turned back to his post, a disturbance reached his ears. The usual hum of the evening was now punctuated by raised voices. Kevin's instincts kicked in. He turned toward the sound, just in time to see a man approaching the entrance. He was out of place, a sharp contrast to the sleekly dressed guests drifting in and out. His wrinkled button-up shirt and scuffed loafers were a far cry from the tailored suits and evening wear that typically graced the hotel. But it wasn't just his attire that set him apart, it was the way he walked. His pace was heavy, deliberate, almost as if each step was a challenge to the very foundation of the hotel. His muttering was barely audible, but his irritation was palpable, simmering just beneath the surface. As the man reached the entrance, he pushed past a family waiting to check in. The father instinctively pulled his young son closer, shielding him from the man's brusque movements. Kevin was already stepping forward, positioning himself between the man and the hotel doors. His calm authority radiated, a shield against the growing tension. "Good evening, sir," Kevin said, his voice steady, unwavering. "I'll be happy to assist you, but we're helping other guests right now. I'll need you to wait just a moment." The man halted, staring at Kevin as if the words were a foreign language. "Wait," he sneered. "Do you even know who I am?" "I don't wait." Kevin didn't flinch. His years of experience had taught him to handle moments like this with ease. "I understand, sir, but I'll need to ensure everyone is served in order. If you'd like, I can have someone assist you shortly." The man's face darkened. His voice rose, now loud enough to draw the attention of those nearby. "Listen, I'm not here to be told what to do by you. Do your job and let me in." Kevin remained composed, his professionalism unwavering, despite the growing weight of the situation. The crowd's eyes were all on him now. But still, Kevin stood his ground, his expression calm, his posture dignified. "I am doing my job, sir. Please step aside, and I'll assist you as soon as I can," he said, his voice firm but respectful. The man was not deterred. Instead, he took a step closer. His voice grew louder, more aggressive. He was now standing so close to Kevin that his anger practically crackled in the air. His finger jabbed out, pointing directly at Kevin's chest as he bellowed, "You think you can tell me what to do? You're just a doorman. Kevin's jaw tightened, but his face betrayed no emotion. He had faced such entitlement before, but this man's hostility, his sheer vitriol, was something else entirely. "I'm paying more for one night here than you'll make in a month," the man spat, his words dripping with disdain. The insult stung, but Kevin refused to let it show. His hands remained clasped calmly in front of him, his composure never slipping. "Sir," he said, voice steady, "I'll need you to lower your voice. We have other guests here, and I'd appreciate your cooperation." The man's face flushed a deep red. His fury was now almost palpable. "Don't tell me what to do," he shouted, his voice roaring with rage. He waved his arms around wildly, making sure everyone in the lobby could see his outburst. The guests were already pulling out their phones, recording the scene unfolding before them. But it wasn't the man's rage that struck the crowd, it was what happened next. Without any warning, the man turned his head and spat directly at Kevin. The glob of spit landed with a sickening thud on Kevin's cheek, an act so vile that the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. A woman nearby gasped, her hand covering her mouth in shock. A security guard, who had been watching from the reception desk, began moving toward the entrance, but Kevin stood still, frozen, not out of fear, but in the practiced restraint he had mastered over years of service. Slowly, deliberately, Kevin wiped the spit from his cheek, his eyes never leaving the man's face. Kevin's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the pocket square tucked neatly into his blazer, the fabric a smooth contrast against his tense skin. He wiped his cheek, the cold remnants of the spit lingering on his face. Yet, his voice, steady as ever, cut through the charged air. "Sir," he began, locking eyes with the man who still radiated fury. "That behavior is unacceptable. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The man's laugh was bitter, almost hollow, as his defiance remained undiminished. "You think you're better than me?" he sneered, his words laced with venom. "You're nothing. Nothing!" But as the security guard, Sam, a burly man with a no-nonsense stance, moved swiftly toward the scene, the contrast between Kevin's unshaken professionalism and the man's unraveling composure could not have been more striking. The tension was palpable. Sam's voice, calm but commanding, broke the silence. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside. Your behavior is unacceptable, and we can't allow you to disrupt our other guests." The man scoffed, brushing off Sam's presence like an annoying fly. "I'm not going anywhere," he spat. "I have a reservation, and I'll be damned if some doorman or rent-a-cop tells me otherwise." Sam's expression didn't falter. "Sir, if you don't comply, I'll have no choice but to call the authorities." By now, the lobby had fallen into an eerie silence. The once lively space, full of the hum of conversations, now held its breath. Guests stood still, eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. A young couple exchanged whispered words, clearly appalled, while an older man near the concierge desk shook his head in disgust. Kevin, unmoved, remained rooted in place. His face was a mask of calm, though inside, a storm churned, anger, humiliation, and an unshakable resolve. He would not let this man's disrespect draw him into a petty confrontation. This was a test, not just of his professionalism, but of his character. Reluctantly, the man took a step back, his bravado faltering. As Sam reached for his radio, the man's voice dripped with disdain. "Fine," he spat. "I'll leave. But you haven't heard the last of me." Sam nodded, keeping his body firmly between the man and Kevin as he escorted him toward the exit. The automatic doors slid shut behind them, and with it, a collective exhale seemed to ripple through the lobby. Kevin straightened his jacket, eyes scanning the crowd. He didn't want their pity. He didn't need applause. He just wanted to move on. But the moment wasn't over. The silence in the lobby began to shift, replaced by low murmurs as guests exchanged thoughts about what they had just witnessed. A few approached Kevin, offering quiet words of support, but he waved them off gently, thanking them without breaking his stoic demeanor. He wanted to put the incident behind him, but fate had other plans. "Kevin," a deep, steady voice called out from across the room, cutting through the murmurs. Heads turned as a tall man in a tailored navy suit approached. His silver-streaked hair and commanding presence made him impossible to miss. It was Richard Bennett, the CEO of the Grand Bellview Hotel, and unbeknownst to most, Kevin's father. Kevin nodded, wiping the last remnants of spit from his cheek. "Yes, sir. Everything's under control," he replied, his voice calm as ever. But Richard's gaze had already shifted to the man being escorted toward the revolving doors. Richard moved purposefully across the marble floor, his polished shoes clicking with precision with every step. The man, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, hesitated just as he reached the exit, his bravado slipping into uncertainty. "Excuse me," Richard said, his voice measured but firm, halting the man mid-step. "Are you the guest who thought it appropriate to spit at one of my employees?" The man faltered, glancing first at Richard, then at Kevin, his arrogance crumbling under the weight of the situation. I didn't know he worked here," he stammered, his voice now tinged with nervousness. Richard's expression remained unreadable. "Difficult," he repeated, his tone sharp enough to cut through the man's weak excuses. "That difficult doorman happens to be my son. And regardless of his role, no one, guest or otherwise, has the right to treat anyone in this hotel with such disrespect." The man's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The realization of who Kevin was hit him like a freight train, and in that instant, his earlier bravado seemed not just foolish, but pitiful. Richard continued, his voice carrying a quiet authority that silenced the room. "This hotel operates on respect and dignity. If you can't uphold those values, you have no place here." A few guests, emboldened by the CEO's words, clapped softly in support, but the applause was fleeting, quickly fading into the heavy silence that followed. The man, thoroughly chastened, turned and left without another word, disappearing into the rainy night outside. Kevin stood motionless. His father's words echoed in his mind, but he hadn't needed Richard's intervention. He could have handled it himself. Still, there was something deeply gratifying about hearing the truth spoken aloud in front of an audience that had witnessed everything. Even as the man disappeared, Kevin knew this night wasn't just about this one incident, it was about the lesson it had imparted for everyone watching. As the revolving doors settled back into place, the lobby slowly came back to life. Guests resumed their conversations, but the energy in the room had shifted. What had just transpired wasn't just another altercation, it was a moment that carried weight, leaving everyone with something to reflect on. A middle-aged woman in a black cocktail dress approached Kevin hesitantly. "I just wanted to say," she began, her voice shaky, "the way you handled that, it was remarkable. You showed more grace than most people ever could." Kevin offered her a small, polite smile. "Thank you," he said simply. "Sometimes it's not about reacting. It's about setting an example." Across the room, a young bellhop, no older than 20, watched Kevin with admiration. He whispered to a fellow staff member, "Man, I hope I can handle myself like that one day." Richard stood nearby, arms crossed, observing the aftermath. He wasn't one for grand displays of emotion, but the pride in his eyes was unmistakable. Walking over to Kevin, he placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," his father said quietly, his voice laced with pride. "Not just tonight, but always." Kevin met his father's gaze, a rare, wordless understanding passing between them, one that only they could fully grasp. His heart swelled, a heavy mixture of gratitude and something deeper. "Thanks, Dad," he replied, the words carrying a weight that lingered far beyond the moment. The incident hadn't just exposed the man's prejudice, it had held up a mirror to everyone who had witnessed it, forcing them to confront their own values. The guests, the staff, all of them had seen it. The message was unmistakable, respect was not optional, and dignity was not negotiable. As the lobby began to settle back into its usual rhythm, Kevin couldn't shake the hope that this one moment might spark something larger. Could it change the man who had walked out? Probably not. But what about everyone else who had stayed behind, observing, reflecting? That was the thought that kept swirling in his mind. Though the lobby regained its elegant pace, the incident lingered like a shadow in the corners of the space. It hadn't been just another confrontation for Kevin. No, it had been a reminder, a sharp one, of the importance of standing firm in the face of ignorance without losing one's dignity. Kevin knew the man who spat on him would likely never change. But that wasn't the point. The way he had responded could ripple through the people who had witnessed it, planting seeds of empathy, prompting self-reflection. Before returning to his post, Kevin paused for a moment, letting out a quiet breath. It was then that a young girl, no older than 10, approached him, tugging gently at her mother's hand. Her eyes were wide, filled with admiration. "You were really brave," she said shyly, her voice soft yet certain. Kevin crouched down, bringing himself to her level. His smile was warm, genuine. "Thank you," he said softly, "but bravery isn't about fighting back. It's about knowing when to stay calm." The girl beamed at him, her smile pure and bright, before she dashed back to her mother. Kevin stood, adjusting his blazer with a deep breath. In the corner of his eye, he saw his father, quietly watching the exchange, his expression unreadable yet filled with pride. Richard gave Kevin a slight nod of approval before disappearing into his office. With a final glance toward his father, Kevin returned to his post, effortlessly greeting the next guest with his trademark warm smile. The incident, in all its intensity, faded into the steady rhythm of the hotel's operations. But it wasn't forgotten. Word spread quickly. Guests shared the story with friends. Some even left notes, praising Kevin for his professionalism and composure. For many, it wasn't just a lesson about prejudice, it became a testament to something deeper, the strength to face hostility not with retaliation, but with grace under pressure. So to anyone watching, take this message to heart: how you treat others truly matters. The roles people play don't define their worth. Dignity, respect, and kindness must always come first. No exceptions. If you agree, share this video. Subscribe. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Together, let's make respect the norm, not the exception.